enjoy the beauty of God's presence and our friendship and fellowship together. I hope you had a chance to look at your worship folder and see upcoming events coming up like next weekend. This is still in the holiday season, so we don't get as much stuff going on during the week. But look forward to next Sunday, the fellowship time that will help a mission cause. And next week for Monday, ladies, looks like there's a special event planned for you. So look at it carefully. If you got questions, talk to those folks that are identified there, and they'll be able to give you more information. And then if you pass Corey Fuqua in the hall today, just say happy birthday. You're looking good for your age.
Thank you.
You're not one of those 39 people, are you?
38.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's ready for retirement, but yeah, 38. Okay. Hey, it's a wonderful day to worship, and one of the ways we worship together is when we come together to give, so that the work of God can be accomplished. Yeah, we do His work when we worship, we do His work when we serve, but we can't do everything that needs to be done. But when we give, we help others do the work that we can do. We help others go to the places that we can't go to. And so we invite our ushers to come forward and on occasion receive God's tithe and our offerings. And we'll support work here at home and all around the world. Now, Lord, how good it is to be in your house, how reassuring it is to know your presence, especially as minister people. We thank you, Lord, for the way you bless us and watch over us. We thank you for the warm fellowship we share together at the church. We thank you for those opportunities we have to serve here in this community. But also, Lord, we thank you for the opportunities we have to do your work in parts of the world we'll never go to and do things that we'll never be able to know about until we get to heaven. So, Lord, accept these gifts that we make today, not just that they can pay the bills here, keep the lights on, and do work in this community, but accept these gifts we make today so that they can be used in other parts of the world to advance your cause, the greater glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Stand and sing as we continue in worship this morning.
about a month ago, just a few days ago. And we came together on Christmas Eve for that celebration. It was beautiful and well attended. And all of us were busy with our Christmas Day, and I'm sure many of you appreciated the springtime weather, almost summertime weather, and you probably did some things outside you normally wouldn't do in December. And now here we are at the end of December, and although it seems like Christmas is a long time ago, it's still with us, just barely. But here's the situation in our house. The lights at the very top of the tree have gone out. You know, that little section up there, about like that. But I'm not coming up there to fix them. It's too close a time to take it down. I suspect when some of the storms come through this afternoon, Rudolph in the backyard will blow over. We did a few days ago on the cold snaps. But if he blows over this time, I'm not setting him back up. I'll just carry him into hibernation in the garage, because that's where he goes in a few days anyway. And so Christmas is still with us, but just barely. And so here we are in December, and as we come to the conclusion of December, kind of tagging the Christmas season, I wanted to share one more message from the Christmas story and kind of round out our experience. And so if you have a Bible with you today, let me invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 2, and you'll see some focal verses that are included in your handout there as we focus on the, I guess we could say the aftermath of Christmas, the second part of the story. Now typically we Baptists don't do these things like Epiphany, other kinds of holidays that are built into the liturgical churches. And so sometimes we just kind of push everything together as if the whole event would have happened in, one short night there in Bethlehem. But it appears that the first Christmas was stretched out for a while. And so as we look at this incident today from the Gospel of Matthew, we turn our attention once again to the wise men. Those reputed kings from the east who came to worship the Christ child. Now, they fit into the story somewhat later than the innkeeper's refusal and the shepherd's middle of the night visit. The implication given by Matthew is that the newborn baby is probably several months or even a couple of years old. For example, you'll notice as we read it again, that they go to the house where the young child was, and not to the place where a newborn was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger for a cradle. Also, Herod shows himself in all his treachery when he learned of their stealthy change of travel plans at the end of the incident. He condemns babies ages 2 and under to death there in Bethlehem. And that horrible decree by the appointed King Herod, he was only king by agreement of the Romans, attempts to eliminate a potential rival king, a born king, that the wise men have come to find. And based on the time the wise men reported their initial discovery of the star, it may be that Jesus at this point is that young toddler, not the infant in the cradle. So with that kind of background, let's look at the story. In Matthew chapter 2, in verses 1 and following. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi, wise men from the east, came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Keep in mind, why would you worship a king? When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi, the wise men, secretly, and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. And so we have built into our Christmas story this mysterious appearance of a star, the recognition of its import by wise men from the East who pursued it on a long, long journey. Now, there's several different ways this story is pictured, and every time I look back at it, I find some of these different ones, and some of them are just inconsistent to me. I can't come to terms with the fact that somebody would think of the wise men were horsemen. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a horseman, but I don't think I've ever seen a nativity display, a creche, with the wise men as horsemen, but somebody in some beautiful picture thought they were. So, to me, there's always camels leading around. And there's another classic scene, and this is more kind of the way we would do it as Baptists, where everything gets pushed together, and you see that everybody made it there on time. You have the whole crowd. Mary and Joseph and the babe are there on the left. A variety of wise men, magi, are near the front. Rough and ready shepherds can be seen in the background. A variety of children and very dressed servants are there with their treasure boxes. And look how well the newborn holds himself. And look how much light a few torches have provided on this classic scene. But yes, there are camels, and they're kneeling there, and you can see them from the rear. But here's the way I always think about it. This is wise man stuff. Nighttime travel across the desert with camels, kings, and a star. And that just seems to make the picture. Before we make some life application drawn from Matthew 2, let's just kind of review some of the history and detail behind the appearance of these wise men in their camels as they made their way to Bethlehem. First of all, the term magi that you'll find in most modern English translations, wise men, you'll see in the Old King James. The term magi is the actual word, the Greek word, that Matthew uses in his gospel. His story of them demonstrates that they were astrologers and interpreters of omens. They were following a star and dreaming dreams. When they arrived in Jerusalem, they were pretty curt and blunt. They had King Herod kind of spitting out his morning coffee when they asked, "Where's the one who's born king?" Now that doesn't mean much to us, but it had a great deal of import for Herod, because Herod had not been born to royalty. Herod was not himself a proper Jew in proper descent. And he laid claim to the throne by two things. One, his political intrigue. He kept his rivals suppressed, even his own sons he had executed. And his close friendship with the powers that be in Rome, where it was the Roman Senate that had decreed that he would be king there in Jerusalem. So when these folks come along and looking for a born king, not an appointed king, a born king, Herod's disturbed because he was paranoid. And they've seen a star. There's something significant about this individual. And Herod's disturbed. And when Herod got disturbed, the whole city got disturbed. See, Herod knew that people didn't like him too well. And he actually arranged, as he got ready to face his death, he arranged for the execution of several hundred leading citizens of the city upon his death, so that if they didn't mourn him, they would at least mourn somebody. Unfortunately, they didn't carry it out, but there's just the kind of man he was. Now, these visitors, these magi, are really what you could call a blast from the past. Because it's not the first time that we've seen this concept of wise men who are able to interpret the things of God and share them. If you go back in the Old Testament to the book of Daniel, you'll see there this record of how Daniel and his companions spent 70 years and more in exile among the Magi of Babylon, the Magi in the east. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, as he conquered different nations, had the habit of bringing the best and the brightest from his vanquished realms into an advisory body that there were wise men and stargazers and dreamers. When he captured Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he added them to his whole menagerie of wise men, of magi. And here's what it says about these wise men in Daniel 1. In every matter of wisdom and understanding of which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters, magi, in this whole kingdom. In fact, Daniel was so well known because of his wisdom that there's one episode in the book of Daniel where Nebuchadnezzar had this ominous dream. He summons everybody together and said, tell me what it means. But he demanded, if you don't tell me what the dream was and interpret it, I will have you all cut to pieces and your houses turned to piles of rubble. So they've got to perform. They've got to come clean, and they've got to be correct. The Magi only succeeded in coming up with wild excuses. Daniel rescued them all with the dream and the interpretation from the Lord. In awestruck gratitude, here's what it says in Daniel 2. The king placed Daniel in a high position, lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylonia and placed him in charge of all the Magi, the wise men. Now, this whole episode of Daniel and the wise men almost feels like biblical deja vu, because there's another occasion in the Old Testament where there's this wise man who comes to the front and it becomes significant in God working with his people. See, there was another famous Old Testament king who had a penchant for keeping wise people around him. He had astrologers and magicians. He was Pharaoh of Egypt. And Genesis tells us of a young man named Joseph who was carted off to exile and imprisonment in Egypt. And one night Pharaoh woke from a terrifying dream, but he found none of his magicians could provide an interpretation. It was Joseph, the Hebrew exile in prison, who provided Pharaoh with God's interpretation. And in response, Pharaoh clothed Joseph like a king. And it says in Genesis 41, they called out before him, bow the knee. Thus Pharaoh set him over all the land of Egypt. And long before Daniel, Joseph knew what it was like to have Magi bow before him. And long before the wise men from the east came, wise men like Joseph and wise men like Daniel were able to convey a word from God that the people needed to hear. And so when we read Matthew's account, you don't need to be surprised if the Magi bowing before a Hebrew. I mean, that's what they did in Egypt. That's what they did in Babylon. And the herald is king. Well, see, at Jesus' birth, recognize how the tables have turned. This time, a star led the Magi from the east into exile. They have to leave home and travel and follow it there. They are searching for what that old scandal Balaam, this tricky prophet predicted in Numbers 24. A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. This time they don't find a man seated at the right hand of Pharaoh or the right hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the right hand of Herod, although that's where they first search. But instead they find a child seated on his mother's lap. And as they bow and worship, they become the first to recognize the end from the beginning. The child will surpass both Daniel and Joseph as the chief of the Magi. Later, Jesus himself will come and say, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Well, when we look back at these mysterious Magi, these wise men of the East, it seems that there are a few things that these wise men know. And I believe we would do well to learn the same lessons. So let's look at them here. Here's the first one. Wise men know the value of worship. Wise men know the value of worship. Notice what they said as they came to Herod. We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And then on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Wise men know the value of worship. See, worship points to that which is beyond ourselves and implies the reality of God. Don Willingham, a long-term missionary years ago in some of the islands of the Pacific, often told a story in his later years of having shared the gospel in a particular setting, and having come across an individual who had never heard it before. But this older lady responded to the missionary by saying, I always knew there had to be someone like that. There was something inside of her that recognized the reality of something outside, something beyond ourselves. Worship always points us to something that's beyond ourselves, and it implies the reality of God. See, not only were they searching for a born king, a rightful king, They were also searching for one worthy of worship, and this implies more than just a person, a man. This indicates they were searching for more than just a baby or a toddler. They were looking for what we would call the incarnate Son of God. Anytime we search for someone that is worthy of worship, it typifies the quest for God that is placed deep within our own hearts. St. Augustine said it so well, our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee. Sometimes when people search for an object of worship, a person of worship, a God of worship, and it's properly directed, it is that motivation that lies behind many of the noble deeds of mankind. Notice what they do, the Magi. They come to worship and they bow down and they give and they pay homage. And it's a noble thing that they do. They avoid the treachery of Herod. It's a noble thing they do. And it's all motivated by the desire to worship. Many times when we come together and we worship, it motivates us to do positive things we wouldn't do otherwise. To feel better about ourselves than we did when we started that worship experience. To find ourselves motivated to take on that task, to stay on task, to try one more time. Because worship sometimes motivates and lays behind those most noble deeds of mankind. But sometimes misdirected worship, that trying to fill the hole in the human heart, can lay behind many of the most destructive deeds of mankind. See, when we have this personal quest for God, and we find Him through Jesus Christ, we find forgiveness and fulfillment and purpose and hope and so much more. But a personal quest for God that is misdirected often results in self-destructive habits, thrill-seeking behavior, a meaningless existence that only accumulates things and doesn't find that connection that's so important. See, when the reality of God is introduced, then first things really must come first. That's why if you look at these words of instruction that were given to ancient Israel, those 10 words that we call 10 commandments, you'll discover that relationship and connection to God comes first. For this drive to worship, this value of worship, implies the reality of God. And when we see that there is God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, well, first things have to come first. Long years ago, the ancient teacher of Ecclesiastes was a genuine skeptic. He looked around, he couldn't see anything worthwhile anywhere. He couldn't see anything that provided pleasure. If you look back to that ancient book, you'll see that he says, I tried this and that, it was meaningless. I tried that and this, it was meaningless. The vanity of vanities, it's like chasing the wind. You ever tried to chase the wind and catch up with it? I saw a brief little whirlwind this last week when William was helping me address the burn pile. And we were burning the stuff and trash and all this extra lumber and stuff that had accumulated. And in the heat, you could see that little swirl move across the grass there. And it's tempting to reach out and try to grasp it. When I was a child in Oklahoma, I remember one fall walking out across part of the pasture, one of these little dust devils came along and it picked up the whirling leaves and it came right where I was. And so I was able to walk over and be in the middle of it. But I couldn't catch it. Ecclesiastes, the skeptic there, says, everything I tried to do was like chasing the wind. It didn't make any difference. And then the ancient skeptic comes to terms with life. And at the very end of the book, he said, now look, let's get down to the bottom of things. The net result is, the conclusion of the whole matter is, the whole duty of man, fear God. You must put God first. And see, when worship is properly directed, it directs us to noble and generous and kind and faithful activity. When it's misdirected, it leads us to all sorts of self-destructive tendencies that try to fill a hole in our heart that can never be filled by thrill-seeking, by drugs and adventure. When the reality of God is introduced, then first things really do have to come first. The writer of Hebrews put it like this. When the reality of God is introduced, it's a terrifying prospect to fall into the hands of the living God. Now, there's two sides to that. If there is this living God who expects justice and activity on our part that's noble, and we fail, yeah, it's terrifying, the prospect of punishment, of falling short. There's another kind of terrifying aspect to it, though. There is something serenely terrifying in knowing that we have relied upon Him, that He is absolutely reliable. It's not terrifying in its destructiveness, it's terrifying in its exuberance. That we have a God we can trust. But I suppose if you're really going to figure out what a wise man is, might do well to identify his opposite number. And when it comes to this notion of worship and the reality of God, the Scripture is very helpful in this point, because 2 times we have to find what the foolish person is and what he thinks or believes. And in Psalm 14 and again in Psalm 53, we have the observation. The fool says in his heart, "There's no God." Logically, then, I think it's fair to say that if we would be like the wise men, we have to take the opposite tack of that taken by the foolish men. Wise men recognize that there is a God who loves and guides and provides for His people. We see a star in the east. They followed it for 2 years. Wise men recognize, as did those kings of Orient afar, that in Jesus we see the Savior, the Messiah, the Redeemer, the Lord. Those who would not be wise, well, those who would be the atheist, are following an irrationally self-contradictory construct. You see, all you have to do is look at creation, the mysteries of the universe, and recognize the design that exists there to say there's a God. All you have to do